The one thing that did trouble me last night, and it troubled me seriously, and is strategic. If Hillary Clinton is the nominee, and there's a small possibility that Bernie could be the nominee, I'd put it at somewhere between 20 and 35%. But he's going to have to win every one of the 6 big states that are coming up by over 54%, if the math that I've seen on multiple sites is correct. And, one of those states is Florida, which is going to be a tough lift. I mean, and another is New York, which Hillary Clinton represented as a senator for 7 years and represented very well. She's a very good senator. So, the odds are the candidate in the fall is going to be Hillary Clinton. But whether it's Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders, either one, Bernie from day one, from the very beginning of this debate, has refused to pick up, basically trash talk on Hillary. He's like, we're going to stick to the debates. We're not going to run negative ads, et cetera. And then, the first one that just kind of made me crazy, and I wrote a piece about this back in January 20th, in fact, where in one of the very first debates, Hillary Clinton said, Bernie, you voted for the Commodity Futures Modernization Act. Well, it turns out, first of all, the Commodity Futures Modernization Act was written or co-written by a guy named Gary Gensler, who right now is the chief financial officer of Hillary's campaign. So were I her, I would not have brought that up. But secondly, it was in an omnibus bill that was a deal that was cut between then President Bill Clinton and the Republicans to keep the government open. And only 4 people in Congress voted against it. And one of them was Ron Paul, who votes against every spending bill. And so in 2008, the next year, Bernie came out, very upset about this bill that Gary Gensler had written and tried to block him from becoming the head of the Community Futures Trading Commission. Gensler had pushed hard for Wall Street deregulation, and Bernie moved to block his nomination. So, that was a disingenuous attack by Hillary against Bernie that I thought was just completely unnecessary. I say this, as I said, I want the Democratic nominee to win, whether it's Hillary or Bernie. And I'm running out of time here on this segment, but I want to dig into this a little more deeply. I think I'll just cut right to the chase. At least during this primary, Hillary Clinton, in my opinion, should either fire or muzzle the David Brocks, John Podestas, and whoever else is advising her to go to use semi-honest or even dishonest attacks against Bernie Sanders. The New York Times has an editorial today by the editorial board. This isn't just some liberal talk show host saying this. The editorial board, the establishment, the editorial board of the New York Times is saying Hillary basically stopped lying about Bernie's record. And, the outrageous one last night, well, we'll get to that after but she is hurting herself. And she is going to need Bernie voters. She's going to need his supporters. She really needs to reboot this campaign and move it forward in a positive direction. And it is really paining me because as I've said many times, either one of these candidates, I'm all in on. When the November election comes, I am all in. Whether it's Bernie or Hillary, we have to have a Democratic president. So anyhow, we'll talk about that. We'll take your calls. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back, 20 minutes past the hour. So first it was, Bernie, you helped write the Commodity Futures Modernization Act. No, I'm sorry, Hillary, your campaign finance chairman did. Then it was Bernie voted against the auto bailout. No, in fact, he voted for it. And here's what's weird. Robbie Mook, I was saying the people she should fire. Last night, according to Ken Thomas, Mook said Hillary Clinton will continue to make contrasts with Sanders on auto bailout. Quote, we will continue to talk about it. I'm telling you, this is why, Hillary, this is why you lost Michigan. And, stop it. Debate the issues. There's real issues here. And well, anyway, this, and then it got, and in fact, apropos of that, this is from the editorial board of the New York Times from yesterday, a lesson in Hillary Clinton's loss in Michigan. I totally agree with this. Mrs. Clinton's candidacy speaks eloquently of embracing the people, values, and thinking that make this nation a leader in the world. But her campaign tactics, particularly in Michigan, did not live up to this vision. Even with a double-digit lead before the primary, she failed to avoid the type of negative tactics that could damage her in the long haul. If she hopes to unify Democrats as the nominee, trying to tarnish Mr. Sanders as she did in Michigan this week is not the way to go. Mrs. Clinton, and this is not some guy who's or woman who wrote an op-ed for this is the editorial board. This is the establishment, the New York Times. Mrs. Clinton falsely parsing Mr. Sanders' Senate vote on a 2008 recession-related bailout bill as abandoning the audio industry rescue hurt her credibility. She doubled down in ads across the state. As the Washington Post noted, quote, "It seems like she's willing to take the gamble that fact checkers may call her out on her tactics Sunday, but the voters won't." Well, I'm telling you, they did. And then they continue. This is the New York Times. The Clinton machine should stop trying to tie Mr. Sanders to the National Rifle Association, although Sanders has a D- with the NRA. In Michigan, Mrs. Clinton's operatives took to Twitter touting the NRA's tweets supporting Sanders' statement that making manufacturers liable for gun violence would destroy gun manufacturing in America. Mr. Sanders, like Mrs. Clinton, has spent decades working against racial discrimination, poverty, and gun violence. To suggest otherwise is simply wrong. And then last night, clip number one. See, and the reason why I think that this is not, you're not actually seeing Hillary. I think you're seeing Robbie Mook and David Brock and John Podesta. I had a one time just trying to introduce Governor Don Siegelman to John Podesta at a restaurant at the Democratic convention in 2004, I think it was, and just he just blew me off. Go away. And I was like, what? These are not nice people. I mean, and I realize politics is not a nice game. But on the other hand, politics can be done with, appropriate ethics. So, but I'm going to play these two clips. And the reason why I'm going to play them both is because what's clear to me is that this is not something that's coming out of Hillary's gut. This is something that was memorized. This is a line that was written by one of these attack dogs. And she never, in my opinion, should have used it because, A, it's demonstrably false. But B, yes, Bernie voted for an amendment that prevented foreign governments from spying on American citizens, particularly on the southern border. Okay, the amendment, 69 other Democrats voted for it. The amendment never made it into the final legislation. This was a meaningless vote, essentially. And here is how Hillary turned it into this giant thing, or her advisors, let's say. Anyway. Clip number one.
He voted in the House with hardline Republicans for indefinite detention for undocumented immigrants. And then he sided with those Republicans to stand with vigilantes known as Minutemen who were taking up outposts along the border to hunt down immigrants.
Yeah. And then, later on in the debate, and this is why I'm saying this is something that was memorized as part of debate prep. And this, here she is again.
In 2006, Senator Sanders supported indefinite detention for people facing deportation and stood with the Minutemen vigilantes in their ridiculous, absurd efforts to, quote, hunt down immigrants.
All right. And here's Bernie's response. And I think, by the way, if you watched and you saw the response of the crowd, you saw how badly Hillary hurt herself last night using this, Podesta Brock kind of stuff. Here is Bernie responding.
What the secretary is doing tonight and has done very often is take large pieces of legislation and take pieces out of it. No, I did not oppose the bailout or the support of the automobile industry. No, I do not support vigilantes, and that is a horrific statement, an unfair statement to make. I will stand in terms of my political career, fighting for workers, fighting for the poorest people in this country. Madam Secretary, I will match my record against yours any day of the week.
There's an interesting piece, and this is the, if the Clinton campaign, they don't even return our calls about, hey, do you want to get a surrogate on? But if they ever were to ask for my advice, I don't know, maybe they are. I would say read this piece in Salon. It went up yesterday. And the title is, "It Should Be Over for Hillary. Party elites and MSNBC can't prop her up after Bernie's Michigan." I disagree with that. I don't think it's over for Hillary. I think that, as I said, I think there's a very high probability that she's going to be the party's nominee. But this point, key lessons that should be obvious to everyone but the media. The old politics is over. The fault lines of the new politics are not cultural issues like guns, abortion, and same-sex marriage that divide Republican and Democratic bases. They are the issues of political reform and economic justice that divide both parties' elites. I've been talking about this for weeks, about the elite consensus is dying on both sides. They divide both parties' elites from both parties' bases and the American people from their government. On these issues, we find the elites of both parties shockingly alike. Among them, global trade, financial deregulation, prosecution of financial crimes, safety net, including Social Security, Medicare, a living wage, and the soft corruption. Hang on.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-536-2370.
Healthcare for all, and above all, the soft corruption of pay-to-play politics. So please reboot your campaign, Mrs. Clinton.